All right, everybody, we are live on YouTube currently. For anyone who is tuning in, my name is John Scavelli. I'm the law director for the city of Worcester. This will be the meeting of the Charter Review Commission. We thank you for tuning in, and we would just let you know that all you need to do if you want to take part and actually comment in the meeting is to go view us on YouTube as you are, sign in to YouTube. That requires that you have an account. They'll ask you to make a channel with that account. So that's just part of signing into YouTube. And once you've done that, you can comment on the meeting. If those comments are appropriate, I will bring them up to the commission and we will respond to you live on YouTube. And if there are any questions anyone has, you can do that through the comments as well. I will be monitoring them. With that being said, I would turn this over to Judge Lizey.
Okay, I'll call the meeting to order at 5:30 p.m. on April 22nd, 2020. Could we have the roll call, please?
Yes. Mr. Lizey,
Present.
Ms. Schatzer? Jennifer?
Here. Here.
Hello. Mr. Weaver,
Here.
Ms. Bollinger,
Present.
Ms. Patton,
Present.
Ms. Dyer,
Present.
Mr. Long,
Present.
Mr. Fitzgibbon,
Present.
Mr. Webster,
He's here, isn't he?
He's
I thought-
muted.
Yeah, present. Sorry about that.
that's all right. Ms. Keating,
Present.
Okay, we have a quorum. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of April 8th, 2020?
So moved. This is Stuart Fitzgibbon.
I have a second.
Louise Keating will second.
I believe there was some discussion that on the second page that where Mr. Dordia said, it's S-A-I-S instead of S-A-I-D. I don't know if that's material or not.
I would say that I think it's immaterial.
Okay. Were there any other corrections that anybody noticed? Hearing none, then I'll call for a vote.
who seconded that motion? Who was the second?
Louise.
Oh, thank you.
Hearing no other corrections of material basis, then I will call for a motion or a voice vote. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say the same thing. Hearing none, then the minutes will be approved as distributed. All right. The first business is the discussion of Articles 7 and 8. And I believe that is Mr. Long and Mr. Fitzgibbon. If you would like to begin with Article 7, if you have any thing in Article 7 that you would like to bring to the attention of the commission for modification or changes.
Matt, why don't you go ahead and go first?
I was just going to offer it up to you, Stuart. No,
I
no
beat-
problem.
Beats to it.
I think we ended up with pretty easy ones here, although I do have a couple what I'll characterize as thoroughly nitpicky things in section 7.03. In the first sentence, we use at the very end during his term, but throughout the rest of the code, we use his, her. So that appears just to be a small typo.
Yeah, and I think if I could chime in, there's also a reference in 703 to councilman.
Yep.
And we should change that to council member to be consistent with Article 2.
Yeah, I think we did member of council elsewhere.
All right, so which sections are we talking about so I can get this down?
Yeah, everything's,
703.
yeah, everything's in 703.
Yeah, gender neutral.
Yeah, gender neutral, or at least both genders in the first sentence, and then gender neutral in the second sentence as to councilman, it should be member of council.
Okay.
And I did a quick search throughout the document. I think the only other place that really appears, it shows it as member of council.
Okay.
And then this may fall into the category that if it's not broken, don't fix it. But I would say my only other comments within section 7, and very specifically still in 703, is whether it warrants a conversation about what constitutes a continuous resident.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm relatively agnostic on it. If it's not broken, we may not want to fix it, but I thought I would at least point it out for conversation. And then also in a similar vein, the last sentence in 703, any officer who ceases to possess such qualification shall forfeit his or her office. That seems, if you're no longer, for example, a resident of the city of Worcester, it seems like something like that should operate by rule, not by the person coming in and voluntarily forfeiting that office.
Okay. So does anyone have any comments on those issues brought up by Mr. Long?
Could I just
I
ask,
read the last,
that continuous resident language? I didn't pick up on that when I first read it. What does that mean? Does it mean you can't, like if you have a house in Florida, you live there 6 months of the year?
And then you're
Is
not
that
going to be
it?
on council.
Pardon me?
Then you're not going to be on council.
Well, you could come back and forth. I mean, there are people who
Oh,
do that kind of thing,
really?
come back for meetings. Yeah.
Jolene, I would say that normally you're talking about being your primary residence. So where do you file your taxes, and where do you are you considered for government purposes to be living, is generally how we would look at that. I personally think that the section is clear enough, specifically because it's somebody who would qualify to vote within the city of Worcester. So I think what we're talking about, continuous residence, is where your primary residence is, as opposed to if you became a resident of the state of Florida, even if you still had a house in Worcester, then I don't think that we would consider you as as qualifying any longer. But if you were still a resident of the state of Ohio and that was still your primary residence, I think that you would be. You could have 3 houses in Ohio, and as long as one of yours is in Worcester and that's your primary residence, I think you would be okay.
Yeah, but Jonathan, and I'm sorry, I've got too much knowledge of people playing with jurisdictional questions of where their residence is, for tax purposes.
Sure.
Is it a plurality of days at a single location? Is it a majority of days in the city of Worcester? Is it defined as where your dog lives, which is how most taxing authorities go and say, is your dog in Ohio? And if your dog's in Ohio, that's probably your primary resident. You shouldn't be able to collect, some other jurisdiction that has 0 taxation. So that's why I'm saying I don't know if it's a problem that needs fixed, but it certainly seems like a pretty broad ambiguity.
Well, why don't we do this? So my guess is that it is defined by the Board of Elections to some degree. So why don't I do a little bit of research and look into that, and then after doing that, if we think it's important to make it more definite or to maybe refer to those definitions, that we can. So let me do that, and if there's not something, then we can talk about if we need to come up with something on our own. But let me see what's already there.
Yeah, and you're right. There may be already in the code somewhere, in the revised code somewhere, that deals with this issue, or there may be an attorney general opinion that deals with it somehow.
That's what
that would be helpful. And I think that too may help with the other concern there. Any person who ceases to possess the qualification shall forfeit his or her office. I'd say that also warrants a closer look to say, is there a cleaner way where we can say, just disqualify them as a matter of law?
Okay. I will see what I can find and I'll get you guys something.
I would like to just say something about that last sentence. Such qualifications shall forfeit his or her office. I kind of read that, and of course the word's not there, but shall have forfeited. As if they have lost it without them doing anything about it. Does that make any sense?
Well, I think what it means is the minute you stop becoming a resident, then you would forfeit your office just by the act of no longer being a resident.
In other words, you wouldn't have to call up the mayor or anyone and say, I'm forfeiting my office. You
Right.
would have forfeited without
Mhm.
taking any action.
Correct.
What do you think about that, Mr. Long? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly where I was going with it. I'd rather have it be the person's act of no longer becoming a resident that disqualifies them, as opposed to some affirmative obligation to call the mayor or call council and say, hey, thought you should know I moved to Florida 6 months ago.
Great. Okay. And I have one other question, just kind of out of curiosity about 7.04 voting districts. Does the city of Worcester automatically, after every census, readjust voting districts? Mr. Scovelli?
I am unaware if they redo voting districts
That's a
after
good
every.
question.
I'm
I'm not-
assuming they probably do.
This is Bob Brenneman weighing in. We do have to realign our wards of the city on every census. So, but the voting districts don't necessarily represent individual wards per se. I can think, and somebody would need to check with the Board of Elections on that, but I don't. They have different precincts, and I'm not sure if like Ward 1 might have 3 precincts in it or what, and each one of those is called a district or not. So, but we do have to redo our wards every 10 years.
All right. That answers my question. Thank you. Any other issues with Article 7? That anybody else wants to bring up? Hearing none, then can we move to Article 8?
Matt, do you want to go first again?
Stuart, I was going to give you the honor.
All right, well, I have 2 items on Article 8. In section 803, this was just a question that was brought to my attention. And that is, do we need to be a little bit more clear about the statement that the members of the review commission, being us, are appointed by council? And I was wondering if we could change that, or we should change that to nominated by the mayor and approved by council, to be more representative of what actually happens.
Well, so the way that it worked this year was that before we did anything else, we actually asked council for nominations. We received a few. And then we worked with the president of council on the rest of our nominations. If we decided to change that, that would just be up to what, this group and council decided. I'm not sure how council would feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if it's generally seen as having worked under the current language, then I wouldn't object to leaving it alone. I'm just raising the question because somebody had raised it with me.
Yeah. It's, I don't know. What do you think, Mayor? I think that might be one the council would take some umbrage to.
I agree that they might feel slighted if we tried to change that. This is the second Charter Review Commission that I've been involved with appointing. First one was back in 2010, and now this one here for 2020. I guess the old adage of if it's not broken, don't fix it. It seems to work okay. we really haven't had any big disagreements, and it does give a sort of a sounding board between the mayor's office and council to sort of vet people to be on an ask list. So in both situations, I have been the one, or someone from the mayor's office has been the one to contact people to say, would you be interested in serving on this charter review commission? So.
Okay, I think given that explanation, Bob, I'll withdraw the suggestion.
Thank you.
The only other thing I had is in section 806, subsection A, the sentence just ends with an accepted. And I'm not sure accepted by what. So that's really a question.
All right, so this section shall be construed to require Worcester City Council and Worcester City Boards and Commissions to take official action and to conduct all deliberations upon official business only in open meetings, unless the subject matter is specifically accepted. So where that could be accepted is through the Ohio Revised Code and or our charter. So we specifically accept situations where you can go into an executive session, and there are certain things that aren't public meetings. And if it's one of those things under the Ohio Revised Code or our charter, that would be where it would be. If you would feel more comfortable as a group with, putting in there, unless the subject matter is specifically accepted under this charter, the codified ordinances of the city of Worcester or the state or the laws of the state of Ohio, we could add that.
That would have been my thought, John, if everybody else agrees.
How's everyone feel about that?
Jonathan, do you have a little bit of background? Are our exceptions parallel to or broader than what's in the Ohio Revised Code? Is there anything that we cover as an executive meeting item that's not otherwise a matter of state law?
They're pretty similar. Ours are a tiny bit different, but the differences are almost insignificant. Ours are a little broader, but not a lot. So they're almost point for point the same. Ours are a little bit more general, and ours are the ones that control. So ours, because of home rule, preempt the state executive session rules.
Okay.
Well, I just feel that the broader, the simpler you make it in here, the less restrictive or the less we have to change every 10 years. I mean, I read it and I assumed that there were, I thought of, school board meetings where they discuss personnel or discipline issues. I mean, I just assumed that those were common public exceptions. I don't know. I just understood it the way it was stated. And I would prefer to keep it as simple as you can.
What does everybody else think? Do we want to go around the group? Maybe start with Carol.
I think it's okay the way it is.
Okay.
I read it the same way that Jolene read it.
Right, Judge Lizey, what do you think?
I tend to agree that it ought to stay the same for a reason that we've discussed before on council, and that is, or at the commission, and that is we're going to present the changes to the electorate. And the more changes we have, I think the less we're going to lose their interest in things. I'd like to just focus on things that really need change and let some of this pass to the next commission.
Ms. Bollinger?
I'm fine with leaving it as it is.
Okay. Mr. Webster?
I in favor of leaving it as is.
Okay. Mr. Weaver?
In the absence of any problems with the existing language, I think we leave it as is.
Mr. Long?
Ditto.
Ms. Schatzer?
In here.
Okay, and Ms.
I'm comfortable leaving as is.
Okay, and Ms. Keating?
Same, leave as is.
Okay. All right, then we will not make any amendments to that section.
We're done with section 8 then?
I don't know, did Mr. Long have some things he wanted to add?
The only other thing I had is an 805. You have a his versus his, her issue in there as
Okay.
well.
What section is that?
8.05.
Okay.
Let me ask you, Mr. Scavelli, and this is Ray Lacey, if you, does the city have the power, or you have the power to change language in the charter to be inclusive without amending the charter?
No.
Oh.
No. No, we can't change anything without all the same procedures, even the most insignificant part of it.
All right.
This is Louise Keating. Years ago, it seemed acceptable, if not even fashionable, to simply make a reference that any reference to him or his shall be considered to include female references. Is it no longer desirable to take that sort of an approach?
I mean, we could do it that way. That's just another option. I think that the concern is that we have sort of a patchwork within the charter itself. And if it was all his and we never changed it from when the charter first went in place, then that would probably fix it. I think the concern is that it's his or hers, he, she, it's just all over the place. And so I think as we've been going, we've been deciding to try to make it more uniform. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree. I think my comments only relate to fixing a nick and inconsistency that we're dealing with at different ways in different places. I'm looking at my former professor, Weaver, and I don't know if it was him or many other professors that reminded us that pronouns are generally our enemy.
All right.
All right. Then I think dealt with item 4 of the agenda.
Excuse me, could I raise one more issue? I would like to, this is Mark Weaver speaking. I would like to make sure that in section 806 B2, that definition of meeting is how meetings should be designated, because it specifically says by a majority of its members. And if I recall an earlier discussion that we had, it was decided or pointed out that a meeting of a minority of the members could be seen as a public meeting. So is this definition compatible with how the state defines what a public meeting is?
I believe that it probably is. You know a lot about this, but what we're usually talking about is, first of all, it's meeting with business. Now, I think there's a difference between when we're talking about things that get to be considered illegal meetings versus what could be a legal meeting under the definition of the charter. And I think what's important there is that you're talking about business and that you have a majority, because we're not going to be considering it a valid meeting unless there's a quorum. That doesn't mean that it wouldn't be an illegal public meeting for the purposes of public records law or for sunshine law, because in that case, you wouldn't want people meeting, even if it wasn't a quorum, discussing business where the public didn't have some knowledge of what they were talking about. But I think for the purposes of this charter, what we're talking about are things we actually consider to be legal meetings versus illegal ones.
And one other question for administration on this. So obviously we're doing this meeting by Zoom, brave new world that we're in today. Is there anything that we should be looking at in this section related to the new world that we're looking forward and the fact that the kind of face of public meetings could be changing?
Well, that would be up to you as a group. I would say that my simple answer would be that right now this is contemplated to be a temporary thing by the state. And we're doing this essentially under state law, allowing us to do this, essentially changing the state law requiring that it be in person. We don't really have anything in here that I think says that it needs to be in person. So if the state were to make that a permanent fixture, where public meetings are always allowed to be online, then I think we would be in good shape. But if you wanted something more definite than that, I would understand. So I would leave that up to you as a group.
Yeah, I mean, I asked the questions with no strong feelings one way or another, other than to say, you know, just asking whether there's a strong feeling on the administration side who have to live by this one way or another.
Yeah, like I said, I think we're anticipating this to be temporary currently. I think that a lot of the members of our public boards and council are looking to get back to in-person meetings as soon as they possibly can. And I think the state law only goes, and I don't remember how long it went to, but there was a time limit on that as well. So like I said, I do anticipate at least now that being temporary. If we wish to address it, we really can't allow for it if the state doesn't. So the only thing we would be saying would, I suppose, would be that if the state were for meetings by electronic means, that we're okay with that, which I don't really know that I see the point of doing that, especially since I think it's unlikely that we'll be in the situation, hopefully, again in the future, but again, we never know.
Even if it was for an extended period of time, there's nothing in here that makes that null and void or inappropriate, is there?
Correct. That was my original point, was that we don't have anything that conflicts with the state law allowing us to do that. And so for that reason, I don't really see it being an issue if we just leave it the way that it is, even if the state were to make this permanent.
All right, does that answer that question? All right, is there any other discussion of Article 8 by anybody on the commission? All right, then we'll move then to number 5 on the next meeting discussion agenda item. And this is where I'm looking for, or at least to give you a little information, and then looking for our procedures for the rest of our meetings of the commission. First of all, Article 9 and 10 are not being discussed yet, and I would say that they would be at the next meeting. In fact, considered putting 9 and 10 on this agenda for the simple reason that I thought there was not too much of changes needed in 7 and 8. I was informed by Mr. Scavelli that Article 10 is still under revision by the city. Is that still correct, Mr. Scavelli?
That is correct. We're still working on one part of it, so I was not really ready to present that to you as a group yet today.
Okay. Will you be ready in 2 weeks?
We will.
All right. So we'll discuss number 9 and 10 of the articles at our next meeting. The second issue is, where do we go from there? What I personally would prefer is that after we discuss 9 and 10 at the next meeting, we give the city, particularly Mr. Scavelli, a chance to summarize everything and then come back for one final meeting on what we wish to adopt recommendations to the Worcester City Council. And that at that time, and even now, I'd like to hear some discussion, if people would like to, about how this will ultimately be recommended to council, and also ultimately, if they agree, council, how it's going to be recommended to the public. I assume, Mr. Scavelli, that the council has the ultimate decision responsibility of what and how things will be represented to the public. Is that correct?
They do. Our suggestion, I think, if everyone here is in agreement with it, was, and I think we talked about this a little bit before, was that we were thinking probably the easiest way to do it would be do it by article. And then the maximum that they would have would be 10 things to vote on, which is already a lot, which is kind of why we want, one thing we'll talk about at the final meeting is if there's some of these we think are less important than others, and whether there may be some we want to minimize just for the palatability of the electorate. But if we have to, 10 I think is at least doable, but we don't want to exhaust them. So what I was thinking we would do is we would break it up into 10 possible issues by article and have it presented that way. We would most likely have a explanation that we provide summarizing the changes that would be accompanying it that the voters would see, and that I would also provide to council so they know how we're planning on presenting it to the voters, and to each of the sections in their entirety. That's sort of what my plan was.
Okay, is there any discussion by anybody on the commission to these two items? How we'll finalize our recommendations to council?
Scavelli's ideas sound fine to me. This is Louise.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Isn't there one article where there's just like one word change? I think it was one of mine. I mean,
There are a couple of those, and we'll talk about that in more detail probably at our last meeting once I go through it all. And those are the ones where we're going to have to decide if we think we really want to move forward with those or not. But we'll
because I kind of think that 10 issues is a little intimidating.
It is, and that's why I'm saying that's what I think we need to discuss once we see it all and we know how important. And like I said, if it's a little thing in the middle of one that's got a lot of changes, I think that's an easy call to make. Just leave it in there.
Well, it was the fund and it was the important one, but it was just one anyway.
Yeah, but if it's an important one like that, we should keep it. So that one I would argue is one of the more important ones actually.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of things we'll discuss once we have kind of our final copy or a final draft, I suppose.
Anyone else have an opinion on that?
That seems reasonable to me. So you're saying there would be 2 more meetings needed? You anticipate finishing in that second meeting?
Yes.
I would say there's a possibility that I think we might need one extra one after that, but I'm hoping we can do 2. So,
Okay.
Yeah, that's my hope as well.
Then are we right on target to get it to council in plenty of time?
we will be.
Any other comments or thoughts?
I would just point out that I was able to look up Ohio Revised Code, Chapter 3, and specifically Section 3.15 is residency requirements for public officials. It's not much more detailed than what we have in our charter, but you can look that up, or I'm sure John can get you copies of that relative to Section 7.03 in the charter.
Okay.
It doesn't say continuous resident. It says at all times during one's term of office. So a little bit different wording, but that's about it.
And I will check some other things too, just to see, because sometimes you'll have like Mr. Long and Mr. Weaver will jump in with me, and probably a lot of the rest of you, and or Judge Lizey as well. Will know that a lot of times it's sort of labyrinthian, and there may be other definitions that apply to that could alter it. So I will check on all that before our next meeting, so I can provide that information for you.
And Judge Lizey, if I could jump in, this is Bob Brenneman. I want to comment about Carol. Thank you so much for considering if we're within a time frame, because that is a really important thing. But yes, we definitely, if you folks finish up within 2 more meetings, that gives us 3 meetings between June 1st and the break after the first meeting in July for council to get it done and get it certified to the ballot for the November election. So I appreciate you keeping that in mind. The other is, and Jolene and Mark and Louise would know from past commissions, it's really an art in how you package things together, because you're right, 10 things on the ballot is a lot, and you'll afraid you might wear your electorate out trying to figure out what 10 different things are being asked of them. So if you can package things together so that it trims them down, sometimes that works a little kinder getting through the electorate. So just a couple comments that I see.
All right. Then our next meeting will be the 6th of May. Warmer weather, spring will truly be here then.
Sure.
Is that a promise?
All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Oh, wait.
Oh,
Time out.
sorry.
I have one question that's bothered me since I did this civil service thing. And I just want to ask you, I guess it'd be Joel or John, go back to Article 5, the civil service, the first one, the first sentence. And I told you that it says retirement there, and that it doesn't address retirement anywhere in the charter or the contracts. And so we decided to just leave it in there.
Mhm.
But my question is, would that obligate the city in any way to do something for retirement? I
I
mean,
don't think so.
it's not gonna, somebody couldn't raise the issue. You have to do something more than OPERS or something like that.
I really cannot think of any legal reason why that would obligate us to anything. If you want me, I could check on that just to make sure that I'm right, but I really cannot
Right.
imagine any reason why that would be that way.
Okay. That was just my concern. That's all.
Yeah, no worry. I will take that down and I will make sure that I take a look just to make sure that I'm right about that. But I cannot imagine a circumstance where that would be the case.
I'm sorry, Mr. Scavelli, I forgot to ask you before I asked for a motion to adjourn whether there were any comments from the public that we need to know about.
There have not been. We have 5 watching and no one has submitted any comments.
All right. Then again, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Dyer.
Ms. Dyer, and a second.
Shatzer.
All right. And all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, say aye. We are adjourned. Thank you for your time.
Thank you all.
Everyone have
Thank
a
you. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye now.